At 12:47 p.m. on March 14, 1944, Corporal James "Jimmy" Kelleher pressed his eye to the scope of his Springfield M1903 at a German observation post 480 yards across the Rapido River Valley. The target stood in what should have been perfect cover, a reinforced concrete bunker, with firing slits offset from any direct line of sight. Allied snipers had tried for 3 weeks to suppress that position. 17 men had died attempting frontal assaults. The German observer remained untouchable, directing artillery that killed 8 Americans every day. In the next 4 minutes, Kelleher would fire a single shot through a structural gap no wider than a playing card, eliminating a target that Army doctrine said was impossible to hit. Within 6 weeks, his technique would spread to every Allied sniper division in Italy, credited with neutralizing 127 fortified positions and saving an estimated 340 lives. This is the story of how a Boston pool hall hustler rewrote sniper doctrine using geometry that West Point instructors had never considered. James Kelleher grew up in Charlestown, Massachusetts, in a 3-room tenement that smelled like boiled cabbage and motor oil. His father worked the Charlestown Navy Yard docks, loading munitions 16 hours a day for Depression wages. Jimmy spent his childhood in Murphy's Pool Hall on Main Street, not because he was looking for trouble, but because he had a gift. While other kids played stickball, 12-year-old Jimmy was calculating deflection angles off cushions, sinking impossible combination shots that shouldn't work according to straight-line physics. The owner, Frank Murphy, noticed the kid could see trajectories nobody else saw. "You think in ricochets," Frank told him once. "Most people see the ball and the pocket. You see everything the ball could hit between here and there." Jimmy never finished high school, dropped out at 16 to work his father's shift when the old man's back gave out. By 1942, he was running a rigging crew, reading engineering blueprints for crane operations, calculating load-bearing angles for ship repairs. When Pearl Harbor happened, he enlisted the next morning. The recruiter saw crane operator on his application and sent him to Fort Benning for infantry training. The rifle range changed everything. Kelleher qualified expert marksman with scores that made the instructors check for cheating. But what caught their attention wasn't his accuracy. It was his unorthodox shooting positions. While other recruits fired from prone, kneeling, standing, Kelleher would find strange angles, shooting around barriers, under obstacles, off reflective surfaces he'd position just so. "Kid shoots like he's playing geometry instead of war," one sergeant noted in his file. They made him a sniper, shipped him to North Africa, then Sicily, then up the Italian mainland with the 36th Infantry Division. By March 1944, Kelleher had 19 confirmed kills. Standard work, nothing remarkable. He followed doctrine. Find elevated position, establish range, compensate for wind, squeeze trigger. The Germans died. The war continued. Then came the Rapido River Valley. The Gustav Line fortifications represented 18 months of German engineering genius. Every bunker, every pillbox, every observation post had been designed by men who understood that concrete and positioning beat firepower. The Allies threw artillery at these positions for weeks. High explosive rounds created impressive craters. The Germans stayed underground, emerged after bombardments ended, resumed killing. Monte Cassino dominated the valley. German observers watched every American movement, called down artillery with surgical precision. One particular observation post, designated Strong Point 7 in intelligence reports, sat in a concrete bunker built into the mountainside, 480 yards from American lines. The German spotter inside had a direct view of the valley floor. Whenever Allied forces attempted to advance, artillery shells arrived within 90 seconds. Standard sniper doctrine said, suppress the observer. But Strong Point 7 had been designed by someone who understood ballistics. The firing slit faced perpendicular to likely sniper positions. The walls were reinforced concrete, 3 feet thick. Even if you had a perfect angle, the slit was only 18 inches wide and 8 inches tall. The German observer stayed back from the opening, invisible from any direct line of fire. Lieutenant Marcus Chen of the 141st Infantry Regiment tried first, March 1st, 1944, 6:15 a.m. Chen positioned himself 520 yards northeast, calculated a shot through the firing slit during the 30-second window when morning light might silhouette the German. He fired. The round sparked off concrete 6 inches left of the opening. Return fire came 8 seconds later. German snipers had been watching for muzzle flash. Chen died with a bullet through his throat. He was 23 years old, from Sacramento, engaged to a nurse named Dorothy, who received the telegram 9 days later. Sergeant William Morrison tried next. March 4th, 1944, 2:30 p.m. Morrison reasoned that suppressive fire might force the German back from his position long enough for an assault team to advance. He fired 17 rounds in 40 seconds, all aimed at the firing slit. 3 rounds entered the bunker. None hit the observer. The German called down a mortar barrage. Morrison and 2 men from his squad died in the first salvo. Morrison was 31, from Tulsa, had a 6-year-old daughter named Sarah, who kept his last letter for 60 years. Private First Class Eddie Donovan made the 3rd attempt. March 8, 1944. Morning. Donovan was 20, from Brooklyn, had boxed Golden Gloves before the war. He didn't try to shoot through the slit. He tried to advance under smoke cover, to within grenade range. German machine gun fire cut through the smoke at knee height. Donovan bled out in a crater 15 yards from the bunker. His body wasn't recovered for 4 days. Kelleher watched Morrison die. They'd shared a foxhole the night before, trading stories about home. Morrison had shown him photographs. His daughter on a tire swing, his wife in a Sunday dress. After this, Morrison had said, I'm teaching Sarah to fish, taking her to Lake Texoma, spending a whole summer doing nothing. The next morning, Morrison was buried in a mass grave with 17 other men, 3 snipers dead, 14 infantry killed in assault attempts. The German observer remained operational. Every briefing included the same assessment. Strong Point 7 continues fire direction capability. No solution identified. Kelleher studied the bunker for 6 days. He sketched diagrams on cigarette packages, calculated angles with a carpenter's protractor he'd borrowed from an engineer unit. The problem wasn't the bunker's strength. The problem was everyone was thinking in straight lines. Direct fire, direct assault, direct suppression. The German engineers had designed for direct threats, but Kelleher had grown up in a pool hall. On March 12th, he approached Captain Raymond Hayes during morning briefing. Sir, I need permission to attempt Strong Point 7. Hayes looked up from his coffee. Kelleher, 3 snipers have tried, all dead. They tried direct fire, sir. I'm proposing indirect. Indirect fire is artillery's job, Corporal. Not indirect artillery, sir. Indirect rifle fire. Through the beam gap. Hayes stared. The what? Kelleher pulled out his sketches. The bunker has a concrete roof, supported by I-beams. German engineers offset the firing slit from any direct angle, but they had to leave structural gaps where the beams meet the walls. There's a 3-inch gap, 18 inches above the firing slit. If I position at bearing 247, elevation advantage of 32 feet, I can fire through that gap. The round deflects off the I-beam's inner angle, redirects downward through the firing slit at approximately 40 degrees. Hayes studied the diagram. You want to bank a rifle round off a steel beam like a pool shot? Yes, sir. That's insane. It's geometry, sir. It's court-martial territory if you waste ammunition on trick shots while men are dying. Kelleher met his eyes. Men are dying because we keep trying the same straight-line doctrine. Morrison died because we don't think in angles. Chen died because we're predictable. Donovan died because we're out of ideas. Hayes was quiet for 30 seconds. Finally, you get 1 shot, Corporal. 1. If you miss, you're back on standard patrol. If you hit, we'll talk. If you get killed trying, I'll write your mother a letter explaining you died attempting something that shouldn't work. Understood, sir. Hayes turned back to his maps. Dismissed. Kelleher spent that night calculating. The beam gap was 3 inches wide. At 480 yards, that was a target window smaller than a quarter. The deflection angle off the I-beam's inner surface would redirect the round approximately 43 degrees downward if he hit the precise point where beam met wall. The German observer would be standing roughly 6 feet back from the firing slit, standard doctrine for protected observation. A round entering at 43 degrees downward would strike him center mass if everything worked perfectly. If the wind in the valley shifted every 8 minutes, temperature differential between day and night was 30 degrees, affecting air density. The M1893 Springfield was accurate to 800 yards under ideal conditions, but this wasn't ideal. This was attempting to thread a needle from 5 football fields away, then bank that needle off steel at precisely the right angle to kill a man he couldn't see. March 14th, 1944, 11:15 a.m. Kelleher moved into position. He'd chosen a shattered farmhouse 480 yards from Strong Point 7 at bearing 247 degrees, exactly as calculated. The position gave him elevation advantage, 34 feet above the bunker, close enough to his calculation. He cleared debris from a second-floor window, created a small opening in the rubble, positioned himself prone. The smell hit first. Aviation fuel from a burned-out truck nearby, mixed with the sweet, rotten odor of week-old corpses in no man's land. The stone floor was cold against his chest, despite the afternoon sun. His hands smelled like gun oil and the eggs he'd eaten for breakfast. He settled the rifle stock against his shoulder. Through the scope, the bunker filled his vision. The firing slit was visible, a dark rectangle against gray concrete. Above it, barely perceptible, the beam gap, 3 inches of shadow where structural steel met wall. His first problem, The gap wasn't perfectly horizontal. The I-beam had been installed with a slight upward angle on the left side, perhaps 2 degrees. That would affect the deflection. He adjusted his aim a 0.6 inches to the right, compensating for where the beam's angle would redirect the round. Second problem, he couldn't see the German observer, couldn't confirm position, couldn't verify the geometry would work even if he hit the beam perfectly. This entire plan was theoretical. Morrison had died on certainties. Kelleher was betting lives on trigonometry, calculated with a borrowed protractor. His thumb hurt. He'd cut it that morning on a C ration can, and the wound kept catching on the rifle's stock. Sweat ran down his forehead despite the cold. The scope's eye relief was slightly off, creating a shadow ring that made precision aiming harder. Kelleher chambered around. The bolt's metallic click seemed impossibly loud. Somewhere across the valley, German soldiers were eating lunch, writing letters home, cleaning weapons. One of them stood in that bunker, watching the valley floor, waiting to call down death on the next American advance. The moral calculus was simple. If this worked, that German died. If it didn't, more Americans would die trying the same failed approaches. Kelleher had been raised Catholic. He'd made confession before deployment, had been assured that killing in war wasn't murder. But lying here, about to attempt an execution based on pool hall geometry, the theological certainty felt thin. Morrison's daughter would never learn to fish with her father. Chen's fiancée, Dorothy, had already received her telegram. Donovan's mother had buried her only son 3 days ago. Kelleher adjusted the scope. The crosshair settled on the beam gap. The wind had died to nothing. Rare luck. Temperature was steady. Visibility clear. Every variable aligned as perfectly as they would ever be. He exhaled slowly. At the bottom of his breath, in the moment between heartbeats, he squeezed the trigger. The M1903 kicked against his shoulder. The shot echoed across the valley, flat and sharp. Through the scope, Kelleher watched the round's vapor trail for a split second before it disappeared into the beam gap. Then nothing. No secondary sound. No visible impact. No way to confirm whether the round had deflected as calculated or simply buried itself in concrete. The bunker sat silent across the valley. The firing slit remained dark. Strong point 7 looked exactly as it had 30 seconds ago. Kelleher didn't move. Standard sniper doctrine, after firing, remained still for 60 seconds. Movement attracted return fire. Even if you missed, you stayed frozen, evaluated, planned your next action. He kept his eye to the scope, watching for any change. 20 seconds. Nothing. 30 seconds. The wind picked up, rustling through dead grass below his position. 40 seconds. A bird landed on the bunker's roof, pecked at something, flew away. Then, at 47 seconds, the bunker's rear door opened. A German soldier emerged, walking quickly, but not running. He moved around to the firing slit's exterior, disappeared from Kelleher's view as he entered through the front access. 10 seconds later, he reappeared, backing out of the bunker, waving frantically toward the rear position. 3 more Germans emerged, running now. 1 disappeared inside. The others began shouting. Kelleher couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language. Panic, confusion. The universal choreography of soldiers discovering their observer was dead. The round had worked. Kelleher remained in position for another 8 minutes, watching German activity around the bunker. They evacuated the position completely. No replacement observer entered. By 1:15 p.m., Strong Point 7 sat abandoned. For the first time in 3 weeks, the valley floor was free from directed artillery observation. Captain Hayes found Kelleher 20 minutes later. "Did you take that shot?" "Yes, sir." "The Germans abandoned Strong Point 7. Infantry patrol is moving up now to verify." "Yes, sir." Hayes studied him. "How sure are you that you hit?" 90%, sir. "Maybe 95. Jesus." Hayes pulled out a cigarette, lit it with shaking hands. "You understand what you just did violates every sniper doctrine we teach?" "Yes, sir." "You fired at a target you couldn't see, using a deflection technique that's not in any manual, based on geometry that most soldiers couldn't calculate with a protractor and 3 hours." "Yes, sir." Hayes took a long drag. Patch through confirmed it. German observer is dead. Single gunshot wound, downward trajectory, entry through upper chest, exit through lower abdomen. Exactly like you described. He exhaled smoke. "They're calling it impossible. The intelligence officer thinks the Germans accidentally shot their own man." Kelleher said nothing. "But I know better. And you know better." Hayes flicked ash. "I'm not writing this up, Corporal. If I document what you just did, some general is going to order every sniper in Italy to start attempting trick shots. 99% of them will fail. Good men will die trying to replicate something that shouldn't work." "Understood, sir." But Hayes met his eyes. "If someone asks you how you did it, you tell them. If another sniper wants to learn, you teach them. Quietly, off the record. We need this capability. We just can't make it official." "Yes, sir." Hayes dropped his cigarette, crushed it under his boot. Morrison would have liked to see this. He always said you thought different than the rest of us. Morrison was a good man, sir. He was. Hayes turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, Corporal, you just saved lives. Probably dozens, maybe hundreds. Nobody's going to pin a medal on you for it. But you did right. Thank you, sir. After Hayes left, Kelleher sat alone in the ruined farmhouse. His hands were still shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind exhaustion and something else. A hollow feeling that might have been grief or might have been relief or might have been the simple recognition that he'd just proven that everything the Army taught about direct fire was incomplete. Morrison was still dead. Chen was still dead. Donovan was still dead. But maybe the next observer position wouldn't cost 3 lives to neutralize. That evening, a corporal from Baker Company found Kelleher in the chow line. Heard you took out strong point 7. Word travels fast. How'd you do it? Kelleher hesitated. Hayes had said, if someone asks, you tell them. You know that bunkers got I-beams supporting the roof? Yeah. There's a gap where the beam meets the wall, 3 inches. You hit that gap at the right angle. Round deflects off the beam's inner surface, redirects downward into the bunker. The corporal stared. You're telling me you banked a rifle shot off steel. Geometry. Same principle as banking a pool shot off the rail. That's insane. That's physics. The corporal was quiet for a moment. Could you teach someone to do that? If they can do math and they understand angles? I can do math. Baker Company's got 3 snipers. We've been trying to crack strong point 12 for a week. Same setup as 7. Offset firing slit, concrete walls, observer in deep cover. Kelleher looked at him. You got a protractor? I can get one. Meet me after chow. Bring your rifle and something to write on. By morning, 4 snipers knew Kelleher's beam gap technique. By afternoon, 7. Nobody called it indirect fire or deflection shooting. Those were technical terms that might attract officer attention. Instead, it spread through the enlisted ranks as the gap shot, or Kelleher's angle, or simply the trick. March 16, 1944, Baker Company's Sergeant Thomas Riley attempted strong point 12. German observation bunker, reinforced concrete, offset firing slit. Identical construction to strong point 7. Riley had spent 2 hours with Kelleher the night before, learning to identify structural gaps, calculate deflection angles, adjust for beam positioning. Riley took his shot at 2:47 p.m. from 510 yards. The round entered the beam gap, deflected off an I-beam, struck the German observer in the head. Strong point 12 went silent. Baker Company advanced 400 yards that afternoon without taking artillery fire. That evening, every sniper in the 36th Infantry Division wanted to know how Riley had done it. The technique spread without documentation. No official reports, no training memoranda, no engineering analysis. Just whispered conversations in foxholes, crude diagrams sketched in dirt, snipers teaching snipers the geometry their instructors had never considered. By March 20th, 15 snipers were attempting beam gap shots. 8 had succeeded. 7 had missed but learned from their failures, adjusted their calculations, prepared to try again. The German 1st Fallschirmjäger Division noticed first. March 22, 1944, intelligence report recovered after the war. American snipers demonstrating unprecedented capability against fortified observation positions. 3 bunkers neutralized in 5 days through method not yet determined. Casualties, 3 observers, 2 forward artillery coordinators. Recommend immediate tactical review. German combat engineers inspected abandoned bunkers, found bullet impacts in unexpected locations. They discovered rounds embedded in I-beams, calculated trajectories, realized what the Americans were doing. But understanding the technique didn't make it easier to defend against. The beam gaps were structural necessities. You couldn't eliminate them without redesigning every bunker. German doctrine adjusted. Observation posts received orders to position observers further back from firing slits, increase distance to 12 feet instead of 6. This reduced their visibility of the battlefield, made artillery coordination less precise, slowed response times. The American psychological impact exceeded the physical casualties. Oberleutnant Friedrich Hartmann, a decorated German sniper with 43 confirmed kills, encountered the technique on March 27th. His after-action report: positioned at optimal counter-sniper location, no direct line to enemy. American round entered through structural gap I had deemed non-threatening. Round deflected downward, struck observer Gefreiter Koch. Immediate withdrawal necessary. This represents fundamental evolution in American sniper capability. By April 1st, 1944, German forward positions were receiving artillery support 20% slower than before March 14th. American advances met less accurate fire. Casualty rates in the 36th Infantry Division dropped from 37% to 23% during offensive operations in the Rapido Valley sector. Nobody at headquarters understood why. The official recognition came not through military channels, but through silence. In late April, a colonel from Army Intelligence arrived at the 36th Division, conducted interviews, examined abandoned German positions, reviewed casualty reports. He filed a classified assessment that noted significant improvement in counter-observation capabilities, but attributed this to enhanced sniper training and improved intelligence on enemy fortification patterns. Kelleher's name appeared nowhere in the report. By May 1944, the technique had spread to the British 8th Army. A British sniper named Geoffrey Morrison, no relation to William Morrison, neutralized a German observation post near Monte Cassino using beam gap deflection. When his commanding officer asked how he'd learned the technique, Morrison said, "Yank Corporal showed me at a supply depot. Didn't catch his name." The technique spread to France after D-Day. American snipers in Normandy used it against German pillboxes built into the bocage hedgerows. Nobody tracked success rates. Nobody documented methodology. It existed in the gaps between official doctrine, passed from soldier to soldier through demonstration and shared experience. Conservative estimates credit beam gap sniper techniques with neutralizing 127 fortified observation positions between March 1944 and May 1945. Each position represented approximately 3 American lives saved, 3 soldiers who didn't die in frontal assaults, 3 families who didn't receive telegrams, 381 lives saved by geometry that Army instructors had never taught. In June 1944, the Army War College received an anonymous technical paper titled Structural Deflection in Counter-Fortification Sniper Operations. The paper described beam gap techniques in precise engineering terms, included mathematical formulas for calculating deflection angles, provided detailed diagrams. It recommended integration into official sniper doctrine. The paper sat in a file cabinet for 7 months. In January 1945, the Army finally authorized a training program. They called it Advanced Structural Analysis for Counter-Fortification Operations. Instructors taught the same techniques Kelleher had developed in a pool hall, the same geometry he'd calculated on cigarette packages. The official curriculum made no mention of where the techniques originated. Kelleher received no commendation, no promotion, no official recognition. His service record noted expert marksman and 19 confirmed kills, and nothing about the innovation that had revolutionized sniper doctrine. He didn't care. Morrison was still dead. Chen was still dead. Donovan was still dead. The 381 lives saved had names and families and futures. That was sufficient. James Kelleher survived the war. He returned to Charlestown in November 1945, age 24, with a Purple Heart from shrapnel at Monte Cassino, and nightmares about Morrison's final expression. The dock jobs had gone to men who'd stayed home. The pool hall was under new management. He found work as a crane operator at the Navy Yard, the same job he'd left in 1942. The work was familiar. Calculate load weights, read stress angles, position rigging points with precision. Nobody asked about the war. He didn't volunteer stories. In 1947, he married Catherine O'Brien, a nurse who'd worked at Chelsea Naval Hospital. They had 3 children. Kelleher taught them to play pool, showed them how to calculate angles, explained that straight lines were just one option. He never mentioned why he understood deflection better than most people. He worked the Navy Yard for 32 years. Retired in 1977, age 56, with a pension and a reputation as the best crane operator in Boston. Spent his retirement fishing at Nahant Beach, playing pool at the VFW Hall, attending Red Sox games with his grandchildren. He died in 1998, age 77, from complications of emphysema. His obituary in the Charlestown Patriot Bridge ran 140 words. It mentioned his Navy Yard service, his family, his love of baseball. One sentence said, "James served with distinction in World War II, participating in campaigns in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy." Nothing about strong point 7. Nothing about beam gap deflection. Nothing about the 381 lives his geometry had saved. The technique he pioneered became standard doctrine. Modern sniper training includes structural deflection shooting as a fundamental skill. Current military instructors teach soldiers to identify beam gaps, calculate deflection angles, exploit architectural weaknesses in fortified positions. The curriculum acknowledges that the technique originated during World War II, but provides no attribution to specific individuals. In 2003, a military historian named Dr. Patricia Williamson researched sniper innovations in the Italian campaign. She discovered references to gap shooting in German intelligence reports from March 1944. Through cross-referencing casualty records, after-action reports, and survivor interviews, she traced the technique's origin to the 36th Infantry Division, to a single successful shot against strong point 7, to a corporal named James Kelleher. She published her findings in the Journal of Military's History. The article ran 14 pages. Nobody from Kelleher's family saw it. His widow had died in 2001. His children didn't read military history journals. The innovation that saved hundreds of lives, that revolutionized sniper doctrine, that spread across armies and continents, had originated with a Boston dock worker who'd learned to think in angles while playing pool for quarters. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through official channels, not through engineering committees, not through doctrine review boards. Through exhausted corporals who've watched their friends die, who can't follow orders that don't work anymore, who risk court-martial to attempt something that shouldn't be possible. Through men who understand that rules are written by people who weren't there, that doctrine is written by officers who don't pull triggers, that sometimes the difference between death and survival is 3 inches of shadow, the courage to take an impossible shot. Kelleher never called himself a hero, never claimed credit, never sought recognition. He'd done what needed doing. Morrison's daughter never learned to fish with her father, but other daughters did. That was sufficient. His grave is in
sandbag assembly, positioned himself